I can't see a darn thing in the studio. It's really ungodly dark because it's a new moon. So there's not a lot of light to see. There's just the bright spotlights and stuff. We tape the show outdoors. A lot of people don't know that. But what we found is the ambience of being outdoors. It's occasionally you'll hear crickets in the background and you'll think, why are there crickets in the studio? It's because we're outdoors. We trimmed the lawn. We put down this linoleum. We have the curtains hanging from trees. I don't think the cameras will tilt up high enough to see the trees, so you're out of luck. You're just going to have to trust me. But they're nice trees. Anyway, tonight, no moon, so it's hard to see, the audience and everything else. They're giving me signals, but who the heck knows what they're saying. So this is going to be like one of them 48-minute shows, because I can't tell when its time is up. Tonight, the topic. I have a topic. I have a heck of a topic. It's my dinner with Woz. I know a lot of you are saying, my dinner with Woz, what the heck are you talking about, Keith? And all of you should turn off your TV, because you are not going to enjoy the rest of the show if you don't know who Woz is. It's for your own good. Just turn on Judge Judy or, let's see, I'm on at 8 o'clock at night. So what else is on at 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday? I have no idea because I have a TiVo, so I don't know when anything is actually on. The TiVo just records things, and then I watch them like 3 months later because that's how far behind I am on the TiVo. Except for Heroes. We watch Heroes pretty much, the day after because that's a great show and you can't miss it. Anyway, tonight's topic, my dinner with Woz. Now, I say my dinner with Woz as if, I had something to do with it. Which I didn't. I have a dinner I go to pretty much every Monday, which a friend of mine, John, set up because he had a dinner he went to every Monday and he hated it. And he thought, how could I not hate this dinner I go to every Monday with my friends? And he thought, well, it's the friends that I hate, really. And the restaurants they ate at. Pretty much the whole thing. I think he hated everything. So he's like, I'm going to go to my restaurants, and I will just tell people where I'm going, and if they want, they can come with. And if I don't like them, I won't tell them. And this solved the whole people he hated coming to dinner with him. Usually there are 4 of us that have dinner, so there were a little issues, in terms of attendance. But it mostly worked out. So most Mondays we have dinner, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of us, whoever manages to make it. It's an amorphous crew. It kind of comes, it goes. Anyway, so I guess a couple weeks ago, John's girlfriend, Stacy, we introduced him. So we're responsible, not in the legal sense, for their being John and Stacy, as opposed to being John and Stacy. Anyway, so John's like, hey, let's have dinner here. And Stacy's like, I heard Woz eats there. And so John's like, we should invite him. And so he emailed Woz. And then here's the part that stuns me. Woz emailed back and went, I don't think you meant to invite me. Because truthfully, I got to think Woz gets a lot of email. And if I were him, pretty much anything that came from anyone that I didn't know would just be straight into spam. That'd be my rule. If I haven't emailed you, it's spam. Because that's one of the rules I have. If I haven't gotten your email address before, odds are you're trying to sell me penis pills. And truthfully, I have enough. You aren't the first person to have tried to email me about the penis pills, and I have bought lots of them. Lots of them. They don't work. That's what scientific evidence has told me. Not well at all. But leaving that aside, I don't want to talk about my personal issues. Well, I do. That's why I have a show. But that's not tonight's personal issue. Tonight's personal issue is my dinner with Woz. Anyway, so John mails him, and then Woz mails back and says, did you actually mean to invite me, or did somehow you email me by mistake? Which I don't know how you would accidentally email Woz. I agree, he has a short email address, but still it's unlikely to be typed by mistake. So John, I guess, was like, no, we meant to invite you. And Woz was like, okay, I'll come. Now this is kind of evidence there is a God. A just God. I mean, if you're into, religious theology and stuff. Because an evil God would not do this. I guess an evil God would have Woz say, sure, I'll come, and then Woz wouldn't come. But Woz came, ergo. This is, like a Pascal's wager thing. If you invite Woz to dinner and he comes, there must be a God. I think I could symbolically logicize that, and you'd believe it. Anyway, so John emails him. He's like, hey, so then he emails recipes. He's like, hey, we're having dinner with Woz. And I'm like, cool? Because that's what I say. I didn't type cool because that would be dumb. You'd probably have to type K00L because that would be cool. That'd be leadish. But yeah. So Monday, dinner with Woz, 7 o'clock, someplace in Campbell, Mexican place. I eat Mexican. Here's the thing that stunned me. John doesn't eat Mexican food. But he invited Woz to a Mexican restaurant. I mean, that's crazy. Because normally, we only eat food John will eat. That's the rule in John's Supper Club, because John sets the place for the most part. Like, we've eaten places that John didn't like, but we've never eaten a place John didn't like more than once. Because after we ate there the first time, John went, we aren't eating there again, because I didn't like it. So 7 o'clock, we get there. Loretta and I, we drive over there. We have my sister-in-law, Maureen, because she comes. And we have my mother. I'll come back to her. Don't let me forget about my mother. She was visiting. I'll come back to her. I have a whole thing about my mother coming to dinner with Woz. So we get there at 7 o'clock. We're like 2 minutes late because that's what we are. We're always 2 minutes late. It's Apple time. Apple time is always 2 minutes late. You got a meeting at 1 o'clock. Meeting starts at 1:02. Why? Because you had a meeting before that went from noon to 1, and it ended at 1. Because everyone goes, this meeting ends at 1. It's 1. We got to leave. Now that leaves you no time to get to your next meeting unless, and here's the clever bit, unless meetings that start at 1 actually start at like 1:05. We should patent that, I think. Maybe someone already has. Probably one of them wacky time management guys, whatever. Okay, dinner with Woz. So we get there. It's 7 o'clock. We stand in line. I look over. I see John at a table. And next to him is Woz. Now, I've met Woz once or twice before, so it's him. Like, to me, there was some risk. Woz apparently is a prankster, which I'll come to in a moment. And briefly before dinner, it occurred to me that Woz was pranking John. Like, yeah, I'll be there. And then we'd get there, and there'd be some other guy who'd have a driver's license that would say Woz on it. And we'd be like, oops. But no, he didn't do that. I mean, next time probably, because he said he'd come to dinner again. We're never going to see the man again. We're just, oh yeah, I'll be there. No, he's never coming again. He's going to giggle himself silly the whole time. Anyway, so he's sitting at the table. He's eating Mexican food. I'm in line with my mother. I'm explaining to my mother what she can eat. Because my mother also doesn't eat Mexican food. Which was the first cause of problems for the weekend. Because John emailed us and said, we're having dinner at this Mexican place. And I replied and said, my mother's here that week. Can we eat someplace she'll eat? Which mostly means, can we eat at like Hometown Buffet or Marie Callender's? Because my mother doesn't eat a lot. She's from Wisconsin and she likes it. So she eats the kind of food that you can get in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, you can get Marie Callender's and Hometown Buffet. Except they call it Country Harvest there. I don't know why. Exact same restaurant, just different name. Anyway, so then John emails back and said, no, Woz is coming. I'm like, well, great. Now I can't go have dinner with Woz because my mom will eat Mexican. But I lied to her. I was like, we're having dinner. We're having Mexican. She's like, I don't like Mexican. And I'm like, there's stuff you can eat there. I feel bad. I mean, I'm probably going to hell for that. Because I lied to my mother. I mean, the truth is, there is stuff there my mother will eat. Because she's like, I hate Mexican. I don't like Mexican. It's too spicy. And I'm like, they have stuff that's not spicy. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. So we get there. So we're in line. And I'm explaining to my mother what she can have. I'm like, you could have a quesadilla. She's like, what's that? And I'm like, how could you not know what a quesadilla is? Haven't you watched Taco Bell commercials in the last 20 years? It's the little dog with the yo cuero. It's like flatbread with cheese. It's as boring as you get. I mean, it's cheese, for God's sake. She's from Wisconsin. Anyway, so we get there. I'm in line. I'm ordering for my mother. We go over and sit down, and Woz is at the table, and he's got a bag of stuff in front of him. And he's conversing with people. which is one of them weird times because you realize that means he's actually a real person, not a god. Because as you may have guessed, I'm a major Apple fanboy. You know, like when I was 13, we bought my first Apple II, and I got all the Apple magazines, and they talk about all the important people that, were at Apple and the events. And I remember getting this, I can't remember the name of the magazine anymore, but it had the big, Woz put on this US Festival, and I had this long interview with him, and I thought, wow, he lives in California. He's an important guy. He started Apple, and he's the engineer, and he wrote all the code. And so I'm a major geek boy. And then, throughout my whole adolescence, I was like, I want to grow up and work at Apple. Except I also wanted to be a doctor. I'll admit I was confused as a teenager. So I went to college after having taken all the pre-med classes in high school so I can go work at Apple. Again, confused. And then I got to college and got to organic chemistry and went, oh, no. I am not going into medicine there. Carbon rings scare and confuse me. And I am not going to get through organic chemistry, and therefore I'm not going to be a doctor. Good, now I can go work at Apple, and then I got a degree in computer science. And then I pretty much left college and went to work at Apple 18 years ago. So, I moved out here. Woz had already left the company by then because he was frickin' rich. And Steve Jobs had been pushed out because he was also frickin' rich. And so I was at Apple, and I was at Apple, and I was at Apple. And you hear stories, about the old day, because there were people at Apple then that, had been at Apple a long time and had worked with everyone, and it was really cool, and I was still a major fanboy, and you read the biographies and everything else, and you're like, Woz! And then I go to dinner, and he's there. So, my heart's going a pitter-patter, and it's very scary, I don't know what I'm doing. So the whole weekend before, I was thinking, what could I talk about with Woz? Because it occurs to me that, I should try to make it interesting for him. I should have, probing questions. Not probing questions. I should have interesting topics. Since he has graced us with his presence at dinner, we should try to make him feel welcome. We should, bring him in as if he were a member of our family and stuff. And then I got to dinner with Woz, and we sat down, and we started talking. And by started talking, what I mean is we couldn't get a word in edgewise. Okay? We're at dinner with him for 2 hours. I think I said 11 words. Because you can't talk around the man. He's talking. And for God's sakes, you don't want to interrupt him because he's more interesting than we are. And trust me, this is hard. I do not normally have difficulty getting a word into a conversation. I think people that know me will say, if I really want to be talking, I'm just going to talk, and you're not going to be able to shut me up. I mean, I can go to lunch and I can listen to other people, but truthfully, I hate that. Normally I chat and people turn to me and they ask me my opinion, and I give my opinion, and they're like, hey, Keith, can you explain this? And I'm like, yes, I can, and then I make crap up. Because you've watched the show, you know what I do. And so dinner with Woz, no, I can't get a word. He brought stuff. So that he did little magic tricks, and he had little toys he gave us, and he's like, here's a card trick, and he'd do the card trick, and I hate card tricks, because normally in a card trick, at the end of the card trick, you feel like an idiot, because they have done something and you can't easily explain it, and beyond that, often I can explain it, because I kind of watch, and I go, well, yeah, maybe they're palming the card here or there. And he did a card trick with me. He was flipping the cards down, and he was like red or black. And I was like, okay, red or black. And we got to the end. And another thing about Woz is an engineer, school teacher for 8 years. Rich, fabulously wealthy, I'm assuming. I don't know if he's fabulously wealthy, but he's got more money than I do, which doesn't say a lot. But anyway, so then after every trick, he has to explain to us how the trick is done. Because the thing he said to us, he said, I'm a mathematician, not a magician. And I thought, okay, but mathematicians don't explain how they do things. I've been to math class. They're just like, you draw the little symbols and you write the lines, and look, the answer. Math. Anyway, so we're at dinner with Woz, and he's doing the tricks, and he's showing things, and he brought a little turtle with magnets, and you spin it, and he brought little rings, and you turn them, and they're a little optical illusion. It was an amazing dinner. But again, none of us could say a thing. It was astounding. And partway through dinner, I realized that he wants us to like him, which I think was crazy because we already like him. We wouldn't have come to dinner if we didn't like him. So it was astounding to have dinner with Woz. And he said maybe he'll come again, which would be great, because now I've had a couple weeks to think of things to say, and maybe I can get like 30 words in. And it'll be cool. I hope so, because it was fun to have him at dinner, and I'd love to actually talk to him in some way. But now having said that, so it occurred to me, I'd love to talk to him, but then I thought, well, why does he want to listen to you? Like, what do I have to contribute to Woz? Like, what have I ever thought that he probably hasn't already thought 4 times and went, hey, that would never work? I mean, he built the computer out of a pop can. And not even like an expensive pop can, kind of a crumpled aluminum Coke can. He had a couple wires and he trimmed it and he built the computer, for God's sakes. Pretty much all I can do is I can rewire the lights in my house. And that's only if they're 3-conductor. Like, if you want me to wire like a 2-way light switch, I am not your man, because I don't get it. Like, I have looked at the little wiring diagram in my home improvement manual, because I have a light in my house that has a 2-way switch on it, except it's wired wrong. And it was wired wrong when I moved in 11 years ago, and it's still wired wrong. Because I don't know how to fix it. Like, I took all the switches off one day, and I stared at the wires, and I was trying to go, okay, this continuity here, maybe no, I don't know why that switch is wrong, for God's sakes. Because I am not an electrical genius. My dinner with Woz. Now, I mentioned my mother was there. I told you I'd come back to that part. My mother was out visiting us. She'd come out to spend some time, mostly with my brother and my nephews, because they're her grandkids. And for God's sakes, you got to spend time with your grandkids, otherwise they won't know who you are. And that's not what you want if you're a grandmother or if you're grandkids, because your grandparents' job is to spoil the bejesus out of you. So if you don't know who your grandparents are, you're pretty much out of luck in terms of having the bejesus spoiled out of you sense. So she's out. She's mostly visiting with them. They went down to Disneyland. But, she kind of flew out on a Thursday, and she spent 2 days with me. Then she went to Disneyland. And then she came back from Disneyland. Then she spent like 2 days with me. Then she flew back to Wisconsin, because that's how she got the good flights. So she's been to Disneyland. She's come back. It's, she's leaving Tuesday morning. It's Monday night. She's still in town. You can't not have dinner with your mother, even though that's the exact same night you're having dinner with Woz. So what do? You got to bring Mom with you to have dinner with Woz. Now the problem here is you have to explain to Mom who Woz is, because for God's sake, you don't want her to embarrass you. Trust me, you don't want her to embarrass you, and she can do it, because she's your mother. She knows things, and she'll just say them, because she will. So I'm like, so we're having dinner with Woz, and she's like, who is that? And I'm like, well, Steve Wozniak. And she's like, okay. I'm like, he was one of the co-founders of Apple Computer, where I work. And she's like, well, yes, okay. And I'm like, co-founders, cover of Time magazine, practically man of the year, worth millions and millions of dollars. For God's sakes, don't embarrass me, Mother. She's like, oh, yes, okay, Steve Wozniak. And then she's like, is he Steve Jobs? And I'm like, no, Jobs. First of all, it's Jobs. Don't get the name wrong. Because he can kill with his brain. I've seen him do it. And so I had to explain to Mom a couple times who Steve Wozniak was. Founder of Apple Computer. Very important person. Like, remember that computer we bought when we were 13, Mom? She's like, yes. I'm like, he designed it. She's like, yes. I'm like, no, not like this is your friend from Bridge Club, Steve, who works works at the Saturn plant and designed the Saturn, okay? Not like he's one of 1,500 people who worked on the car, okay? No, this is the guy who designed it. This is the guy who was like, I'll put this chip here and put some circuits here and we'll do this to get the whole thing. Like, just sat down in his room, over a couple of weeks and was like, well, I could make a computer from scratch, from wire and sand. And I bet he's done it. I bet in his garage, Woz has a bag of sand and some wires, and he just goes down there every once in a while just to see if he can still do it, and gets a big cup full of sand and 7 wires, and is like, I'm going to make me a computer this weekend. And then the next weekend, he's like, I'm going to use less sand next time. And eventually, he'll get to where he needs 7 grains of sand and 2 wires. And he can do a computer that can do, 117 frames a second on Doom. I bet he could do it. 3 grains of sand and 7 wires. My dinner with Woz. So, like I said, Woz likes pranks. He was telling us about all these pranks he was doing all night that he used to do to his friends. He didn't mention a lot of pranks he'd done recently, and I think that's because of the Department of Homeland Security. Because truthfully, a lot of the stuff he did is the kind of thing that would get you into Gitmo. Or at least on a plane to, Afghanistan. Back in the old days, you could do pranks. Like, you could take laser pointers into class and you could point them at things. And nowadays, you take a laser pointer into class, there's going to have someone with a gun pointed at you in about 4 minutes. Like, you need to put the laser pointer down, Mr. Wozniak. And you'd be like, all right. Pranks, Mom. One last thing I'll mention, then we'll move on. So as we're leaving, he drove here, so we all leave the restaurant. And it's as is typical with our dinners, dinners don't so much end as they just slowly break up. You all kind of walk out of the restaurant, then you stand in the parking lot, and you're chatting by your cars, and then someone's like, oh, I got to get up tomorrow, and then you leave. So we get out there, he gets, he's at his car. It's a Prius, great car, low gas. My mother's never seen a Prius before. So she's like, oh, that's a Prius. That's a nice looking car. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, I didn't think it would look nice because it's a Honda. First of all, they're from Toyota. It's a whole different company. I agree they're both from Japan, but they're different companies. But second of all, why just because it's from Toyota would you think it would look bad? And then I realized her whole theory of cars is, a Midwest Wisconsin, foreign cars come from the early 1972s when they're tiny and don't work well. She buys Buicks for many years until now. Now she buys Lexuses. I'm like, well, Lexus is also a foreign car. And she's like, I don't think so. Yeah. So anyway, he's got his Prius, and he's talking it over with my mom about the Prius, which to me is just the craziest thing. Okay, if you had ever told me my mom and Steve Wozniak would be talking about cars in a parking lot at 9 o'clock on a Monday night, I'd have been like, no, they won't. Okay, I've had weird dreams before, but none that weird. Anyway, and so he's like, yeah, well, I gotta go on this, and I go, is that a Segway in your trunk? The man has a Segway in the trunk of his Prius, because he's Woz, for God's sakes, because he rides around in Segway. He plays Segway polo. And I have to explain what a Segway is to my mother. I'm like, it's like a scooter, except it's got batteries and it only has 2 wheels. And she's like, yeah, okay. She doesn't know what a Segway is. I mean, she's just agreeing with me to get me to shut up, I think. Is all I can think. My dinner with Woz. It was fabulous. And hopefully he'll come again. Let's see, what else do I got here? Oh, here we go. We invited Woz to the show, because why not? We got his email address, and apparently we get through the junk filter, so we got to take advantage of it before he changes that. And he said, no, I can't make it. I'm going to be watching the Warriors, because they're playing tonight. Go Warriors, I guess. And he's like, but I got a topic for you. I'm like, cool, I got a topic from Woz, because we had briefly talked about watches at the dinner. And Woz has a Nixie watch, and then I'd explain to my mom what a Nixie watch is, and I'll explain to you. So Nixies are like, back in the 70s, if you wanted to have, numbers on an electric clock, the only thing they had were these little Nixie tubes, and they run off like AC current, and they need like 1,000,000,000 volts to drive them, and they're like tiny neon lights basically, and they're hand wired for the little letters and stuff, and they're really cool. So Woz, of course, being the cool guy he has a Nixie watch. I mean, it's huge because these Nixie tubes are 1/4 inch around and inch high and stuff, and probably runs on batteries he's got to replace every 2 days or something, because it's a 120 volt watch basically, and it's set so that when he lifts his arm to a certain angle, it flashes the time, because there's not enough energy to keep the digits going all the time. You lift the watch and you can see what time it is. I had a watch like this with LEDs when I was little. You had to push the button to see what time it was. So we got on the topic. I also have a geek watch. Here, I'll show you briefly, but you can't see it because it's crappy TV, so the fabulous guy that puts up the subtitles right now, he's off in the other room. I'm sure he'll find a picture and put it up. And I got to be nice to him because I badmouthed him in the last show and he made me look like an idiot. But fabulous guy is all I'm saying. If you see him on the street, shake his hand. He's a great guy. Anyway, I got me the Geek Watch that shows me when the sun sets and when the sun rises, and it can tell me what phase of the moon is and when the spring equinox is, and it's got one hand that goes around once a day. To me, it's a great idea. Like, why have two hands on a watch? Yeah. That's just one hand too many. And why go around more than once a day? Just one thing a day. When you divide the day into 100 parts or something. But the French tried that, it didn't work. So I got my Geek Watch. He's got his Geek Watch. I've noticed geeks have watches that do amazing things. Like my Geek Watch, again, sunrise, sunset. It saves me the trouble of going outside. Like most people, if they want to know if it's dark out, they got to go outside. I could look at my watch and go, no, it got dark about 4 millimeters ago. That's all I'm saying. Geek watches, if you go search for geek culture, you'll find geeks have the most amazing watches. And it's not like the expensive Rolexes and stuff. It's the expensive watches for other reasons. I guess I don't have a lot else. Here's, briefly, a couple other things we've done lately. We went to the Cupertino Cherry Blossom Festival over the weekend. Or as I prefer to think of it, the Cupertino Cherry Blossoms a month ago festival. Because of this damn Al Gore thing. Cherry blossoms are blooming like a month early. And it's all Al Gore's fault. So Al, stop it. Okay? Put the weather back. We'll make you president. That's all I'm saying. Okay? We make you president. You put the weather back the way it used to be. Everyone will be happy. That's really all the time I got for tonight. It's been great again. See, I got through none of my... I knew I'd spend the whole thing on My Dinner with Woz. I wrote these other pages just, because I could. We'll see in a month. Okay, where was I before? Gilligan's Island. Here's the thing about Gilligan's Island. First of all, the theme song, okay? That theme song is like crap. Like, you hear that theme song, and you gotta hear that theme song again. I'm told that we have to go to the Silent Theme song in the store, and it sells like 170 copies of that. For no reason at all. You're like, why would anyone buy that? Oh, they do. Because it's like crap. That's just not illegal. Yeah.